For what this development means in the fight against COVID and your health, we're joined by Dr. Amesh Adalja, a senior scholar at the Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security and an adjunct assistant professor at the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. Welcome back to Morning Rush. Always good to see you. So what is the pricing going to do to getting shots in actual arms? You know that the appetite for these booster shots is already lower than where doctors and physicians and we want it to be. But what about, when this price hike happens, what is that going to do you think?
In my analysis, I don't really think it's going to have a major impact because what we know is that what's driving uptake right now is not price. There's an element of vaccine hesitancy. There's an element of people who don't understand where boosters are beneficial and where they're not. That's actually what's driving it. It's not price. And remember, we have vaccines, for example, against shingles that cost a lot more than Pfizer and Moderna COVID vaccines, for which there are shortages, which people are more than willing to get. So I think a lot of this might be some political bluster. This was not going to be something that was always covered by taxpayers. It was eventually going to transition to the normal mechanisms that we have for vaccines, in which vaccines, like I said, against shingles and against HPV, Gardasil, are much more expensive than the Moderna and Pfizer COVID vaccines.
So you don't think that this would be just an extra barrier or an extra reason for somebody to say, no, never mind, I was kind of on the fence, but COVID is COVID at this point, what else can we do?
Well, I think that most insurance companies are going to cover this. This is going to be a standard vaccine that's covered. There's certain rules about insurance that Obamacare put into place that if a vaccine is endorsed by the ACIP, then insurance companies have to cover it. And that certainly will be the case for most commercial insurers, Medicare, Medicaid. The people that are uninsured, I think there are going to be ways to actually get them the vaccine if they need to. There are going to be programs that companies have in place. But I don't think that price is what's holding back that 35% of the U.S. population that's not vaccinated. I think we have a more fundamental problem here, and I think this is kind of a little bit of a distraction. And I think Moderna and Pfizer we want people to be commercially engaged in making vaccines for emerging infectious disease. And one of the ways that they get engaged is that they get a return on investment that's requisite, because they could be involved in cancer vaccines or more lucrative types of things. And we've had this perennial problem that Senator Sanders got involved with the Zika vaccine issue, and we don't have a Zika vaccine after he wrote a major New York Times op-ed chastising Sanofi for the price they were going to charge the U.S. military. So what I don't want is companies to get disengaged with the emerging infectious disease market.
Interesting. So with all that being said, we have been seeing overall, like Alex mentioned, less people getting COVID boosters. If there's more boosters introduced moving forward, do we think people are still going to continue getting them regardless of the price, regardless if their insurance covers it or not? Do you think it's, in general, people are just, our COVID future is looking a little different than our COVID past has looked?
I definitely think it's looking different because many people are protected against severe disease by the current vaccines. And what we need to do with boosters is actually target those to individuals that are high risk, people that are above the age of 65, diabetics, obese, high blood pressure, cardiovascular disease, lung disease, pregnancy, immunocompromised status. That's where we actually get benefit from those boosters in terms of prevention of severe disease, hospitalization, and death. And most of those people are not going to have some kind of price issue that prohibits them, because they're going to be covered by Medicare, Medicaid, or other insurance companies. I think that the issue here is that people are not enthusiastic about the boosters because they're not really protective against infection the way they once were, because the virus has evolved. Our vaccines are really aggressively good at protecting against severe disease, hospitalization, and death. And I think we have to continue to talk about people who are at high risk and make sure they're getting covered by vaccines, by boosters. Universal boosting, I think, is not going to be what the optimal policy will be until we get different types of technology in these vaccines that make them more transmission blocking the way they once were before the virus evolved away.
Right. So the majority in the new House Representatives has expressed a desire not to spend more money on the fight against COVID. What will that mean for the months ahead? And when we're talking dollars and cents, how much money are we talking about when it does come to actually paying for these vaccines?
Well, I think what we need to make sure is that Congress doesn't lose the opportunity to actually have a proactive policy towards infectious diseases. In COVID-19, that public health emergency is likely to wind down over the next couple of months, and it's going to be less of an issue. But what we don't want is when things leave the headlines that Congress becomes very reactive and very passive, and the next infectious disease emergency isn't available. Right now, they need to start to transition some of the drugs that are only available on emergency use authorization to the commercial market before they don't spend money on them, because right now there are only certain ways you can get some of these drugs. For example, Paxlovid is only available on emergency use authorization. That needs to be transitioned before Congress stops funding it, because there's no other way to get it if it's under emergency use authorization. When we're looking at the pricing of these vaccines, they're looking around in the hundreds, in the $100 to $150 range. I think there's some negotiation going on that will go on between insurance companies and the companies on how much they're going to charge for it. That's kind of a little bit of a black box, how pharmaceutical companies and insurance companies agree on a price. Mm-hmm. The same will go through. Same thing will happen with Medicare and Medicaid as they negotiate that price. But I don't think this is going to be an outsized price. As I said, it's going to be less than the shingles vaccine, less than the HPV vaccine, which people do readily get.
Right.
All right, Dr. Amesh Adalja, thank you so much, as always, for joining us. Really appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me.